He turned East Oakland into an empire, drove Rolls-Royces through the ghetto, and when they buried him, 1,500 people followed his horse-drawn carriage like he was royalty. He was 32 years old, and he changed the drug game forever. August 23, 1954. Oakland, California. The city that lived in San Francisco's shadow, the forgotten stepchild across the Bay Bridge. East Oakland, where Felix Mitchell Jr. was born, was already struggling. Black families who had migrated from the South during World War II found jobs in shipyards and factories, built communities, tried to create better futures. But by the 1950s, those jobs were disappearing. The shipyards were closing, the factories were relocating, and East Oakland was becoming what it would remain for decades. A place where hope went to die, where poverty wasn't just a condition but a generational sentence. Felix's parents were working people trying to survive. His father worked whatever jobs he could find. His mother tried to hold the family together in a neighborhood that was falling apart around them. Felix grew up watching his parents struggle, watching his neighbors struggle, understanding that honest work led nowhere except more struggle. The Oakland of Felix's childhood was changing. The Black Panthers were organizing in the city, preaching revolution and community defense. But they were also being destroyed by FBI infiltration, police violence, and internal conflicts. The dream of Black power was dying, replaced by something darker, the crack epidemic that would devastate Black communities across America. And Felix Mitchell would be one of the men who brought that devastation to Oakland. By his teenage years, Felix was already running the streets of East Oakland. He dropped out of school. What was the point? School taught you to get a job, but there were no jobs. School taught you to follow rules, but the rules were written by people who didn't care if you lived or died. Felix was smart, not book smart necessarily, but street smart, survival smart. He understood power dynamics, understood how respect was earned and maintained, understood that in East Oakland, the only law that mattered was the law of the street. He started small like everyone did. Petty theft, selling pot, running errands for older criminals. But Felix was different. He was watching, learning, understanding how the game worked. He saw how disorganized street crime was, how much money was being lost to inefficiency, how much power was wasted through stupid gang wars. Felix had a vision that most street criminals didn't. What if you ran crime like a business? What if you organized it, systematized it, made it efficient? What if instead of fighting over corners, you controlled entire neighborhoods? What if instead of selling to individual customers, you supplied entire networks? By the mid-1970s, Felix was in his early 20s and already thinking bigger than anyone else in East Oakland. And then a new product hit the streets, a product that would change everything: powder, specifically the rock form that would become known as crack. In the late 1970s and early 80s, cocaine was flooding into America. But powder was expensive, a rich person's drug, not accessible to poor communities. Then someone figured out how to cook powder into crack. Rock cocaine, cheap enough for poor people to afford, intensely addictive, devastatingly profitable. Felix Mitchell saw the opportunity immediately. Crack was the future. It was cheap to produce, easy to sell, and created customers who would do anything for the next hit. It was a product that sold itself, and the profit margins were astronomical. Felix started building what would become the Felix Mitchell Organization, a drug trafficking enterprise that would dominate East Oakland for years. But Felix didn't build it like a traditional gang. He built it like a corporation. He established territories, assigned them to lieutenants, created rules and systems. He didn't allow his dealers to use. Addiction made you weak, unreliable, useless. He didn't allow unnecessary violence. Violence brought police attention, disrupted business. He created quality control. His product had to be consistent, reliable, better than the competition. Felix also understood marketing. He created a brand, made people want to work for him, made customers seek out his product. The Felix Mitchell Organization became known for quality stuff, fair dealing by street standards, and absolute enforcement of its rules. By the early 1980s, Felix controlled the majority of crack distribution in East Oakland. His organization employed hundreds of people: dealers, runners, lookouts, enforcers. It was a multi-million-dollar empire built on rocks that cost pennies to produce and sold for dollars. By his mid-20s, Felix Mitchell had achieved what seemed impossible. He became rich in the ghetto. Not comfortable, not doing okay, rich. Rolls-Royces rich. Jewelry rich. Mansion rich. Felix drove through East Oakland in a Rolls-Royce Silver Spirit, wearing expensive jewelry, dressed in designer clothes. He wasn't hiding his wealth or his power. He was flaunting it, showing everyone that it was possible to escape poverty, that someone from their neighborhood could make it. To the people of East Oakland, Felix was complicated. He was a drug dealer destroying their community, but he was also proof that success was possible. He employed people who couldn't get legitimate jobs. He provided money to families in need, paid for funerals, gave to the community. Felix understood the importance of street respect and community support. He wasn't just a criminal, he was a provider, a success story, someone who had beaten the system that was designed to crush people like him. This made him popular, protected, almost untouchable despite his criminal empire. Kids looked up to Felix. Why wouldn't they? School teachers and social workers told them to study hard and maybe they could get a minimum wage job. Felix showed them you could drive a Rolls-Royce, wear gold, live like royalty. The message was clear. The system was a lie, crime was the only real opportunity. Felix became a celebrity in East Oakland, more famous than any politician or businessman. He was the king and everyone knew it. The Felix Mitchell Organization wasn't a gang, it was a criminal enterprise with structure, hierarchy, and systems that rivaled legitimate businesses. At the top was Felix, the CEO, the boss, the final authority on all decisions. Below him were lieutenants who controlled specific territories. Below them were dealers who sold directly to customers. Below them were runners who transported product and money. At the bottom were lookouts, kids, often teenagers, who watched for police and rivals. Everyone had a role, everyone knew their place, everyone understood the rules. You didn't steal from the organization. You didn't use the product. You didn't talk to police. You didn't operate independently in Felix's territory. Violations meant beatings or worse. Felix also established financial systems. Money was collected, counted, and moved up the chain systematically. A percentage went to Felix, a percentage went to lieutenants, dealers kept their cut. It was organized, efficient, and generated consistent profits. The organization controlled entire housing projects in East Oakland. Felix's dealers operated openly, customers came and went freely, and local police were either paid off or too overwhelmed to do anything. Some housing projects were essentially open-air drug markets and everyone knew it. Felix also invested in enforcement. He employed muscle. Men who handled violence when necessary, who intimidated rivals, who punished people who violated the rules. These weren't just random thugs. They were organized, disciplined, effective. The Felix Mitchell Organization at its peak generated an estimated $800,000 per day, nearly $300 million annually. For a young black man from East Oakland, Felix had built an empire that rivaled legitimate corporations. One of the most famous images of Felix Mitchell was him driving his Rolls-Royce through the streets of East Oakland. It was symbolic, powerful, and controversial. The Rolls-Royce represented everything Felix had achieved: wealth, power, status, success. But it also represented everything wrong with his empire: money made from destroying his own community, wealth built on addiction and despair. Felix didn't care about the contradiction. He wanted everyone to see his success, wanted kids to know that someone from their neighborhood had made it. The Rolls-Royce was a statement. I won. I beat poverty. I became something. But the Rolls-Royce also made Felix a target. Law enforcement saw it as evidence of drug trafficking. How else could someone from East Oakland afford a $100,000 plus car? Rivals saw it as disrespect, as Felix flaunting his power. Community activists saw it as a symbol of how drugs were destroying Oakland. The car appeared in news stories, in police reports, in community meetings. It became almost as famous as Felix himself, the symbol of the drug dealer as king, of poverty replaced by luxury, of the American dream twisted into something dark and destructive. Years later, people would still remember the Rolls-Royce, still talk about seeing Felix roll through the neighborhood like royalty. It was one of the defining images of Oakland in the 1980s, beautiful and terrible, impressive and tragic. Despite Felix's attempts to minimize violence and run his organization like a business, the crack trade was inherently violent. People died. Rivals, informants, people who stole, people who were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Felix ordered murders when necessary. Rivals who tried to operate in his territory were eliminated. People who stole from the organization disappeared. Informants were found dead. The enforcement was ruthless, efficient, and designed to maintain absolute control. The violence wasn't random or uncontrolled. That was the point. Felix used violence strategically to send messages, to maintain fear, to ensure compliance. But he avoided the kind of open warfare that characterized some drug organizations. Wars were bad for business. But Felix couldn't completely control the violence. His dealers got into disputes, his customers committed crimes to get money for crack, his rivals retaliated when they could. East Oakland's murder rate soared during Felix's reign, and while he wasn't directly responsible for every killing, his organization created the environment where violence flourished. One of the most controversial aspects of Felix's legacy is this question. Was he better than the chaos that came before, or did he make everything worse? He brought organization to the drug trade, which reduced some random violence. But he also expanded the market, made crack more available, created more addicts, and ultimately caused more destruction. On August 21, 1986, just 2 days before his 32nd birthday, Felix Mitchell was murdered in Leavenworth Prison. He was stabbed to death by another inmate in what appeared to be a planned assassination. The official story was that Felix was killed over a drug debt or a personal dispute. But many believed it was a hit ordered from outside, possibly by rivals taking advantage of his imprisonment, possibly by former associates who feared he might cooperate with authorities, possibly by people who wanted revenge. Felix's murder shocked Oakland. Despite his crimes, despite the damage he had caused, many people in East Oakland saw Felix as one of their own. He had succeeded where others failed, had built something from nothing, had shown that someone from their neighborhood could be powerful and wealthy. News of his death spread quickly through East Oakland. People who had known him, who had worked for him, who had looked up to him, they mourned. Not because they supported drug dealing, but because Felix represented something. The possibility of escape from poverty, proof that the system hadn't completely crushed their community. Felix's body was returned to Oakland for burial. And what happened next was unprecedented in Oakland's history, and controversial across the nation. On August 27, 1986, Felix Mitchell's funeral became one of the most controversial events in Oakland's history. It wasn't just a funeral, it was a spectacle, a statement, a moment that revealed how complicated feelings about Felix were in East Oakland. Felix's body was placed in a $16,000 bronze casket, dressed in a $3,000 suit. The casket was loaded onto a horse-drawn carriage, something usually reserved for fallen police officers or civic leaders. The carriage rolled through the streets of East Oakland, followed by an estimated 1,500 people. The procession was enormous. People lined the streets, watching the carriage pass. Some were mourning, some were curious, some were angry that a drug dealer was being honored like a hero. The crowd was diverse, young and old, addicts and community activists, people who had loved Felix and people who had hated what he represented. The funeral generated national media attention. News crews from across the country descended on Oakland, filming the procession, interviewing mourners, asking how a drug dealer could receive what looked like a hero's funeral. Critics were outraged. Community leaders condemned the spectacle, argued it glorified drug dealing, sent the wrong message to young people. They pointed out that Felix had destroyed more lives than he helped, that the money for the elaborate funeral came from selling crack, that mourning him was insulting to his victims. But supporters had a different view. They saw Felix as someone who had succeeded against impossible odds, who had provided jobs and money when nobody else would, who had proven that someone from East Oakland could be something. They weren't celebrating drug dealing, they were mourning one of their own. The funeral remains controversial decades later. Was it appropriate to honor Felix Mitchell with such an elaborate funeral? Or was it a natural expression of complicated feelings in a community that had been abandoned by government, society, and opportunity? Felix Mitchell's legacy in Oakland is overwhelmingly negative. While some people remember him as a community figure or successful businessman, the reality is that his organization caused immeasurable damage. Crack cocaine devastated East Oakland in the 1980s. Addiction rates soared, families were destroyed, entire neighborhoods became war zones. While Felix didn't create the crack epidemic, he was one of the primary distributors who brought it to Oakland on a massive scale. The violence associated with the crack trade killed hundreds of people in Oakland during Felix's era. Young men died fighting over corners, innocent people were killed in crossfire, addicts committed crimes to support their habits. The murder rate in Oakland skyrocketed, and much of it was directly or indirectly related to the drug trade Felix helped build. The economic damage was also severe. Property values in East Oakland collapsed as neighborhoods became drug markets. Businesses left, investment disappeared, and the cycle of poverty and crime became self-reinforcing. The damage Felix caused took decades to even partially repair. Children who grew up during Felix's reign were surrounded by drug dealing, violence, and hopelessness. Many followed his example, seeing crime as the only viable path. The generational impact of what Felix did continues to affect Oakland today. But Felix's legacy is also a warning about what happens when communities are abandoned. East Oakland was already struggling when Felix rose to power. There were no jobs, no opportunities, no investment. In that environment, someone like Felix, who could provide money and jobs, even through illegal means, becomes attractive despite the damage. After Felix's death, the Felix Mitchell Organization began to collapse. Federal prosecutions continued, targeting lieutenants and associates. Without Felix's leadership, the organization fragmented into smaller, competing groups. The violence in East Oakland actually increased after Felix's death. The organized, controlled approach Felix had imposed gave way to chaotic gang warfare. Multiple groups fought for Felix's former territory, and the body count soared. Some of Felix's former associates tried to rebuild the organization, but none had his charisma, intelligence, or ruthlessness. They were arrested, killed, or simply failed to maintain control. The empire Felix built was gone within a few years of his death. But the model Felix created, treating drug distribution like a business, organizing it systematically, controlling territory, survived. Other organizations in Oakland and across the country copied Felix's methods. He had shown how to run a criminal empire efficiently, and that lesson outlived him. Felix Mitchell's impact on Oakland's black community was profound and mostly destructive. The crack epidemic he helped fuel destroyed countless lives. Addicts who lost everything, families torn apart, children raised in chaos. Many Oakland residents who lived through the Felix era describe it as a nightmare. Neighborhoods that had been poor but functional became war zones. People who had struggled but maintained dignity became desperate addicts. The social fabric of East Oakland was shredded. But there's also a complicated truth. For some people, Felix provided opportunity when no one else would. He employed people who couldn't get legitimate jobs. He gave money to people in need. He was part of the community in ways that police, politicians, and social workers never were. This doesn't excuse what Felix did, but it explains why his funeral drew 1,500 people, why some people still speak of him with a mix of respect and regret, why his legacy is more complicated than drug dealer who destroyed Oakland. The real tragedy is that someone with Felix's intelligence, charisma, and organizational ability could have been an incredible force for good. In a different environment, with different opportunities, Felix Mitchell could have been a legitimate business success, a community leader, someone who built instead of destroyed. But he was born in East Oakland in 1954, and by the time he was old enough to make choices, the only real choice was what kind of criminal he would become. Years after Felix's death, people in Oakland still talk about the Rolls-Royce. It has become a symbol of success and failure, of dreams and nightmares, of what happens when the American dream is twisted by poverty and desperation. For some, the Rolls-Royce represents the possibility of escape from poverty. Felix proved that someone from East Oakland could have wealth and luxury, could drive through the hood in a car that cost more than most people's houses. It was proof that success was possible. For others, the Rolls-Royce represents everything wrong with how poverty creates criminals. The only way for a young black man in East Oakland to afford a Rolls-Royce was to sell drugs, to destroy his own community, to build wealth on the backs of addicts. It was a symbol of how the system creates its own monsters. The Rolls-Royce also represents the visibility of drug dealing in the 1980s. Felix didn't hide. He flaunted his success, drove through Oakland in broad daylight, showed everyone what he had achieved. This was both his power and his downfall. The visibility made him a legend, but it also made him a target for law enforcement. Today, when people talk about Oakland in the 1980s, about the crack epidemic, about the damage and the legends, the Rolls-Royce always comes up. It's an image that captures an era, beautiful and terrible, impressive and tragic. Felix Mitchell's approach to drug distribution, organized, systematic, businesslike, changed how criminal organizations operated. Before Felix, street-level drug dealing was often chaotic, disorganized, violent. Felix showed that you could run a drug operation like a corporation. Territory management, quality control, employee discipline, financial systems. He applied business principles to crime and proved they worked. This model was copied across the country. Drug organizations in other cities studied what Felix did, adopted his methods, built their own versions of his empire. The crack epidemic of the 1980s and 90s was characterized by organized drug distribution networks that looked remarkably similar to the Felix Mitchell Organization. Law enforcement had to adapt to this new reality. Traditional policing couldn't handle sophisticated criminal enterprises. This led to increased federal involvement in drug enforcement, to RICO prosecutions of entire organizations, to longer sentences for drug trafficking. Felix didn't invent organized drug distribution, but he perfected it in ways that influenced criminal organizations for decades. His legacy in this regard is significant and entirely negative. He made drug dealing more efficient, more profitable, and ultimately more destructive. Felix Mitchell's story is ultimately a tragedy of wasted potential. He was intelligent, charismatic, organized, capable, qualities that could have made him successful in legitimate business. But he was born in a place and time where legitimate success seemed impossible. East Oakland in the 1960s and 70s offered young black men very few paths to success. Education was underfunded, jobs were disappearing, discrimination was pervasive. The system was designed to keep people like Felix poor, powerless, stuck. In that environment, crime became rational. Why work minimum wage when you could make thousands dealing? Why follow rules written by people who clearly didn't care about you? Why trust a system that had failed your parents and grandparents? Felix chose crime and he was good at it. Too good. He built an empire, lived like a king, and died at 32 in prison. His life could have been different, should have been different, but the options available to young black men in East Oakland were limited by forces beyond their control. This doesn't excuse Felix's choices. He destroyed lives, fueled addiction, caused immeasurable damage. But understanding his story requires understanding the environment that created him, the systems that failed him, the lack of opportunities that made drug dealing seem like the only viable path to success. Felix Mitchell's rise coincided with the crack epidemic that devastated black communities across America in the 1980s. Understanding Felix requires understanding this larger context. Crack appeared in the early 1980s and spread rapidly through poor, primarily black neighborhoods. It was cheap, intensely addictive, and devastatingly destructive. Within years, crack had created a public health crisis, destroyed families, and sparked violence that made inner cities war zones. Felix didn't create crack, but he was one of the primary distributors who brought it to Oakland on a massive scale. His organization made crack easily available, affordable, and pervasive. Without Felix and organizations like his, the crack epidemic might have been less severe in Oakland. But it's also true that if Felix hadn't distributed crack, someone else would have. The market demand existed, the supply was available, and the profit potential was enormous. Felix filled a role that would have been filled regardless. The crack epidemic also revealed systemic failures. The war on drugs focused on arresting dealers and users rather than treating addiction or addressing root causes. Sentences for crack possession were far harsher than for powder, creating racial disparities in incarceration. Law enforcement militarized, treating urban communities like occupied territories. Felix Mitchell was both perpetrator and product of this era. He caused immense damage, but he also operated in a system that created the conditions for his empire to exist and thrive. Felix's funeral wasn't just a moment of mourning, it was a statement about poverty, about community, about the complicated relationship between criminals and the people they victimize. The 1,500 people who followed the horse-drawn carriage weren't all supporters of drug dealing. Many were people expressing frustration with a system that had abandoned East Oakland, that provided no opportunities, that seemed to care more about punishment than about people. The funeral also revealed how celebrities criminals can become in communities that have no other success stories. Felix was from East Oakland, he had succeeded, by certain measures, he had shown it was possible to escape poverty. That mattered to people even if the method was wrong, even if the cost was too high. Critics were right to be outraged by the spectacle. Giving a drug dealer a funeral fit for a hero sends terrible messages, particularly to young people. It suggests that crime is acceptable, that destroying your community is fine as long as you get rich. But the funeral also revealed uncomfortable truths about American society. When legitimate opportunities don't exist, when communities are abandoned, when the system clearly doesn't care, people create their own heroes, their own success stories, even if those heroes are criminals. Felix Mitchell's funeral was controversial because it made visible the contradictions and failures that most people prefer to ignore. Felix Mitchell's story has been told in documentaries, articles, books, and hip-hop songs. He has become a legend, a cautionary tale, a symbol of the crack era in Oakland. In some representations, Felix is portrayed as a villain, the drug dealer who destroyed his community, who caused death and addiction, who chose money over morality. This version emphasizes the damage Felix caused and warns against following his path. In other representations, Felix is portrayed more sympathetically, as a product of his environment, a victim of systemic racism and poverty, someone who made understandable if wrong choices. This version emphasizes the lack of opportunities Felix faced and contextualizes his choices. The truth is probably somewhere between these extremes. Felix was neither pure villain nor tragic victim. He was an intelligent, ambitious man who made terrible choices that caused immense suffering, but who operated in a system that limited his options and created the conditions for his empire. Hip-hop culture in particular has complex relationship with Felix's legacy. Some rappers reference him as an example of street success, while others use his story to warn against the drug game. He appears in Oakland rap frequently, always as a figure of both power and tragedy. The media representations of Felix Mitchell reveal how difficult it is to tell stories about drugs, poverty, and race in America without falling into simplistic narratives. His story resists easy moral conclusions. Today, Oakland is still dealing with the legacy of the crack epidemic and the drug empires that flourished in the 1980s. East Oakland remains one of the poorest areas in the Bay Area, still struggling with crime, poverty, and lack of opportunity. But Oakland has also changed. Gentrification has transformed some neighborhoods, though this has created new problems: displacement, loss of community, cultural erasure. The crack epidemic has largely ended, replaced by other drug problems, other challenges. Young people in Oakland today still hear stories about Felix Mitchell. Some remember him as a legend, others as a cautionary tale. The Rolls-Royce, the funeral, the empire, these stories persist, passed down, exaggerated, mythologized. What's often lost in the legend is the human cost. The families destroyed by addiction, the young men killed in drug violence, the communities devastated by crack, the generational trauma that continues today. These victims don't have legends, don't have songs written about them, don't get remembered in the same way. Felix Mitchell built an empire that lasted a few years. The damage he caused has lasted decades. That's his real legacy, not the Rolls-Royce or the funeral, but the pain that continues long after the legend has faded. He was 32 years old when they killed him in Leavenworth. 32. He had lived like a king for less than a decade, drove Rolls-Royces through streets that had never seen wealth, built an empire that generated millions while his community drowned in crack. They gave him a horse-drawn carriage at his funeral. 1,500 people followed through East Oakland like he was royalty, like he was a hero. But Felix Mitchell wasn't a hero. He was a warning about what happens when poverty meets opportunity meets ambition meets poison. He showed that someone from the hood could build something massive, could become powerful and rich. But what he built was death. What he became was a ghost. And the empire he created? It disappeared the moment they put him in the ground. He was the king of Oakland. But kings who rule with crack don't get happy endings. They get 32 years, a prison cell, a knife in the back, and a funeral that people still argue about decades later.